Living the Science of Mind, page 52. Two Great Leaders. Jesus and Moses are the two outstanding personages of the Bible. It is inescapable, then, that we should find the lives of these two leaders touching the very essence and meaning of the great spiritual principles which the Bible represents. We find the teaching of Moses and the Mosaic Decalogue based on the concept of a divine presence and an immutable law of cause and effect. But there is a certain warmth, color, and personal relationship to the infinite, which is not as apparent in the teachings of Moses as in the teaching of Jesus. It was the mission of Jesus to reveal this close relationship that every individual has to the divine presence and the universal law. It might be said that Moses was the great universalist and Jesus the great individualist. Moses was the inspired leader who recognized the universal I am, and Jesus was the one who recognized the individual I in this universal I am. He understood that the abstract universal principles must remain concrete and real in our own individual experience. For he said, "As the Father hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life in himself." The people with whom Moses was associated were like children. Moses was like a father to them. Consequently, we find in the teachings of Moses a whole category of laws, of thou shalts and thou shalt nots, born out of his paternal interest in his people. If we carefully look into the deep meaning of these laws, we find they were all designed to reveal the one divine presence to the undisciplined mind. Our study and reading are a process of disciplining our own thoughts to grow into greater spiritual understanding. Continually, we find Jesus referring to the law and the prophets. But with his advent, for the first time in human history, we find one who balanced the universal law of cause and effect by introducing the personal factor. We find one who boldly proclaims that the life of God is in people and the law of God is operating through people. It was this that distinguished his teaching from that of everyone who preceded him. Jesus was the greatest individualist who ever lived. He based his whole teaching on the value of the individual life, the significance and meaning of the thought that, as great and wonderful as is the concept of a divine presence and a universal law, there is at the center of every person's being a revelation of this presence and an exemplification of this law. But as great an individualist as Jesus was, he made the claim that behind the individuality is the spiritual oneness which holds us all together in unity in love. The whole story of Moses and Jesus finally simmers down to this simple fact. God, the original creative spirit, the universal I am, and the power of the law of God are at the center of every person's being. Moses taught the law, but it remains for Jesus to show us how to use it. And that is why we find so many references in the teaching of Jesus to the thought that I am in the Father, and the Father in me. He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. Like all great spiritual leaders, when Moses had received the revelation of the divine presence, he desired to impart it to others. He recognized that truth itself is universal and belongs to all people. While Moses was the great lawgiver, he undoubtedly realized that there was something beyond even the law, which is love. He prophesied the fulfillment of his teaching in the life of Jesus when he said, The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me, unto him shall ye hearken. And Jesus said, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. When we study the teaching of Jesus, we discover that while Moses had taught the universal law of cause and effect, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and that we must all suffer from the mistakes we have made, Jesus added to this the concept of a universal parenthood and a universal siblinghood and the law of love. These two propositions, rightly understood, become the greatest spiritual system of thought ever given to the world. If their universal scope is not understood, they are restricted to a definite time in history and to a few people. The time and the people were merely examples of what should finally happen to the whole world. The teaching of both Moses and Jesus was timeless. When we find the key to the meaning of their teaching, we shall have found the key to our own freedom. Our trouble has been that we have not discovered that this key, which unlocks the doorway to the larger life, is, as Moses said, in our own mouth. We have not realized that the thing which seems so insignificant in the scheme of things, the personal self, is, as Jesus taught, the keystone of the arch. Remembering then that the Bible is a book of the emancipation of humanity, which means the freedom of each of us, we must never lose sight of the necessity of combining the teaching of Moses with that of Jesus, and come to realize that the reason why Jesus fulfilled the law was that he understood the full meaning of the building of the temple, which temple the apostle said we are. There is no question that Jesus introduced a whole new outlook on life, a whole new philosophy of living, for he alone had the faith and the courage to announce without qualification and without limitation that the same power that created everything and holds everything in place is also at the very center of our own being. It is little wonder that, having discovered the inward authority of the divine presence, Jesus, like Moses, called others to follow him, proclaiming a way of life and truth. For the secret was not to be to him alone, but a light unto the feet of every person. It was not to be a power that he alone knew how to use, for he said, those that believeth in me, the works that I do, shall they do also, and greater works than these shall they do. Jesus laid down the divine gauntlet. To refuse to pick it up would be to stand in darkness when there is light at hand. And he revealed the fount of living waters from which, he said, if a person drink, they will never thirst again. To refuse to drink from this fountain, even though its waters are at hand, is to choke ourselves with the dryness of our own throats. But how can we drink from this fountain unless we recognize its presence? This is why Jesus told us that we must believe.